Humble farmer enters a luxury dealership and is humiliated by the manager, but when he reveals the reason for being there, everyone cries. The morning gleamed on the city's horizon, reflecting every detail of the luxury dealership's impeccable marble floor. Inside, the atmosphere was almost silent, except for the muffled sound of careful footsteps and voices exchanging formalities. The store was more than a sales space. It was a temple to luxury, where each car seemed a work of art, polished until it shone like a diamond under strategically positioned lights. Joseph entered through the main door, hesitant but with a determined look. He was a thin man, his skin marked by decades of working in the sun on the fields. He wore a faded dress shirt with buttons that seemed ready to pop off and simple fabric pants, slightly dusty. His worn leather sandals made a slight creak with every step. The contrast between his humble figure and the opulent environment could not have been more striking. Immediately, his entrance drew attention. Two salesmen near the counter exchanged quick glances, followed by muffled chuckles. A customer flipping through a catalogue gave him an up-and-down look, raising her eyebrows before returning to ignoring him. "I think he's lost," whispered one of the salesmen with a mocking tone. "Oh, he just came for the air conditioning, poor guy," replied the other, laughing quietly. However, Joseph didn't seem to notice the reactions around him. He walked slowly, his eyes shining as he admired the displayed cars. Each vehicle was more impressive than the last, but it was when he spotted a specific model that his steps stopped. It was a sports sedan with elegant lines and a finish in a gleaming metallic shade. He stood there, motionless for a few seconds, as if hypnotized. With a trembling hand, he extended his fingers toward the hood. It wasn't just a car to him. It was a symbol of a dream shared with Isabel, his life companion. She always talked about that specific model, imagining what it would be like to drive on open roads, feeling the wind and enjoying the freedom. Before his hand could touch the vehicle, a rude voice interrupted him. Hey, sir," said a tall salesman in a tight suit, with a forced smile that quickly turned into a look of disdain. "Please, don't touch the car. It's a high-end vehicle, costs more than you can imagine." Joseph took a step back, surprised. "I just wanted," he began to say, but was interrupted again. "Just wanted what? This isn't a place for, let's say, curious onlookers. Can I help you with something more affordable? Maybe a bicycle?" The tone of irony prompted laughs from nearby colleagues. The elderly man tried to stay calm, but his face revealed a mix of embarrassment and pain. "I came because—" He tried to explain, but before he could finish, the manager was called. Edward, a middle-aged man with perfectly combed hair and an expensive suit, appeared with firm steps. Looking at Joseph, his expression carried the same air of superiority that seemed to be the norm in that environment. He crossed his arms and raised his chin, as if analyzing the elderly man. "Any problem here?" he asked the salesman without taking his eyes off Joseph. "This gentleman was examining the sports sedan, but I thought it best to intervene before anything happened, Mr. Edward." The manager let out a theatrical sigh, approaching Joseph like one would address a child who doesn't know where they are. "Sir, I'm sorry to inform you, but this isn't the kind of store that accepts curious glances. If you want something, I suggest visiting simpler dealerships. Here we work with clients who truly understand the value of what we sell." Joseph tightened the hat he was holding in his hands, nervous. "I understand the value, sir. My wife and I saved our whole lives to buy a car like this." The sentence made Edward release a short, incredulous laugh. "A whole life? And you think that's enough to pay for one of these? Look at yourself. Do you know how much this vehicle costs? I won't even waste my time explaining. Do yourself a favor and save everyone's time." The words were followed by muffled laughter from the salesman. One even pretended to cough to disguise a chuckle. Joseph, trying to maintain his composure, took a step toward the exit, but not without murmuring first. "I just wanted to fulfill her dream." Edward followed him to the door, apparently determined to shut down any possibility of Joseph staying there. "Sir, please leave before our customers start complaining. And next time, think about how you're dressed before entering a place like this. Your odor is unpleasant." Edward's final words were a cruel blow. Joseph bowed his head, struggling against the shame that was suffocating him. With slow, heavy steps, he left the store, the laughter and prejudiced glances following him to the exit. Unbeknownst to him, Joseph had left his leather bag on one of the benches near the entrance, where he kept all his savings, the result of a lifetime of hard work. Silence returned to dominate the store, but something invisible had changed, and as Joseph walked away with his head down, his heart carried the weight of a dream that seemed increasingly distant. The dealership's operations continued normally after Joseph left. The muffled laughter and sarcastic conversations about the lost old man still echoed among the salespeople. Edward returned to his office, satisfied with having resolved what he considered an unnecessary distraction. However, Charles, the youngest and newest salesperson on the team, remained quiet. He had watched the entire scene with a mix of discomfort and disbelief. Charles was different from the others. Despite his youth and ambition, he still carried the simple values he had learned from his parents, humble workers. He knew what it was like to be treated as less, just for not having the right appearance or resources. What had happened to Joseph had affected him in a way he couldn't ignore. As Charles reorganized catalogs on the counter, his eyes caught something out of place. On a bench near the entrance was an old leather bag. He looked around, searching for someone who might have left the item, but no one seemed to notice. He approached, picked up the bag, and noticed it was heavy. Intrigued, he discreetly took it to a back support room, away from the curious gazes of his colleagues. Carefully, he opened the bag, hoping to find something that would identify the owner. What he saw surprised him. Inside, there was a bundle of bills, neatly tied with rubber bands, along with small folded pieces of paper. Each paper had handwritten notes indicating specific amounts, dates, and even small comments like "Sale of chickens, $250, or Isabel, $50 for medicine." Each figure seemed to tell a story of sacrifice and effort. Charles stood still, holding one of these papers, feeling a tightness in his chest. Whoever the owner of that bag was, that money was clearly the result of a lot of hard work and care. Then he remembered the elderly man and how he had left humiliated. The connection was immediate. That bag could only be his. Without hesitation, Charles put the money back into the bag, making sure everything was in order, and hurried out of the store. He knew he would need to catch up with him. Once on the sidewalk, he looked both ways and spotted the fragile figure of Joseph walking slowly, almost rounding the corner. "Sir, wait!" Charles shouted, running in his direction. Joseph stopped, surprised, and turned slowly. Upon seeing the young salesperson, his expression closed, as if expecting another attack. "What now?" he asked with a tired but firm voice. "Your bag. You left it at the store," Charles said, extending the item. Joseph's eyes widened. He carefully took the bag, as if holding a piece of his own life. He opened it quickly, checking the contents, and when he saw everything was intact, he let out a relieved sigh. Thank you so much, kid," he murmured, visibly moved. Charles hesitated for a moment, but something compelled him to continue the conversation. "Sir, I'm sorry for what happened in there. It wasn't right. No one deserves to be treated that way." Joseph looked at him with a melancholic smile. "I'm used to it. People like me have no place in places like that. I just came because I needed to try." "Try what?" Charles asked, now genuinely curious. Joseph fell silent for a moment, as if pondering whether he should share his story. But there was something in Charles's sincerity that encouraged him to speak. "My wife, Isabel, is very sick. Cancer. Already in an advanced stage." He paused, taking a deep breath to hold back his emotions. It was always her dream to have that car. We spent our whole lives saving, dreaming of the day we could do this together. But now I just want to fulfill her last wish before it's too late. Joseph's words struck Charles like a blow. He felt a lump in his throat as he tried to imagine the weight of that love, that sacrifice. Every coin in that bag, every note on the papers represented not just effort, but also hope. We sold our animals, our little piece of land. I kept everything I could. But it's still not enough, Joseph continued with a lost look in his eyes. I thought I could convince someone at the store to help me, maybe finance the rest, but they just saw an old, poor, useless man. Charles swallowed hard, feeling anger grow inside him, not against Joseph, but against the system and the people who dismiss stories like his without even listening. "Mr. Joseph," he said, trying to control the emotion in his voice. "I don't know how, but I'll find a way to help you." Joseph frowned, confused. "Why, you don't even know me." Charles shrugged and smiled, a small but sincere smile. "Because your story reminded me of my father. He was also a simple man, but full of dreams. And because I think it's the right thing to do." Joseph looked at the young salesperson for a long moment, and for the first time since he entered that store, he felt seen as a human being. He nodded slowly, holding the bag close to his chest. "Thank you, son. You've already done more for me than many would." As Joseph continued on his way, Charles stood on the sidewalk, watching him walk away. The weight of the story he had just heard remained on his shoulders, but it also ignited something inside him. He knew he would need to make an important decision, and deep down, he was willing to do whatever it took to help that man fulfill his wife's dream. Charles returned to the store with new determination, feeling that from that moment on, nothing would be more important than keeping his promise. The air inside the dealership felt even heavier when Charles returned. The scene of Joseph being humiliated still echoed in his mind. He looked at the impeccable shine of the cars in the showroom and at his colleagues who, amidst laughs and frivolous conversations, had already forgotten the incident. But Charles couldn't. There was something different in him that day, something driving him to act. As soon as he entered, Edward called him for a quick meeting in his office. The manager was seated behind a dark wooden desk, surrounded by recognition plaques and certificates that seemed to exalt his leadership abilities. Edward's courteous smile quickly turned into a serious, almost cynical expression as Charles closed the door. "Charles, you're doing well in sales, considering you're new here. But I need you to understand one thing," Edward began, adjusting his shirt cuffs. "What happened earlier, that was a test for you." Charles frowned, confused. "A test?" "Yes, exactly. We work with an exclusive clientele, customers who have the purchasing power to buy one of the cars we sell. That gentleman, as tragic as his story may be, wasn't a client. He was a distraction. You wasted time chasing after him when you could have been focusing on real prospects." Charles felt his blood boil. He knew Edward was wrong, but the manager's paternalistic tone made it even harder to contain his indignation. "With all due respect, Edward, I think we're here to help anyone who walks into this store. It doesn't matter how they dress or what they seem to be." Edward let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Don't be naive, Charles. This is business. Feelings and kindness don't pay bills. They don't bring profits. If you want to grow here, you need to learn to prioritize." Charles remained silent for a moment, staring at the man in front of him. Edward's words echoed as a reminder of everything he hated about that environment. While the manager talked about targets and profits, the image of Joseph and his savings bag invaded his thoughts. He remembered stories from his childhood, how his father struggled to support the family, and how people often treated them with disdain for being humble. "Do you have anything else to say?" Edward asked with a challenging look. Charles looked up, his determination clear. "I do. I think we're here for more than just selling cars. I believe Mr. Joseph deserves to be treated like any other customer." Edward leaned forward, his face hardening. "If you continue with that attitude, Charles, maybe this isn't the right place for you. Think carefully about what you want for your career." Charles left the office with a heavy heart but a clear mind. He knew he couldn't change Edward or the store's toxic environment, but there was something he could do, and the answer lay in his own story. That night, Charles sat at his small kitchen table, staring at his bank statement. His savings weren't extraordinary, but they were the result of months of hard work and long hours selling cars to demanding customers. He had planned to use them to fulfill a small personal dream, taking a specialization course in automotive design, his true passion. But now, that money seemed to have a greater purpose. The story of Joseph and Isabel wouldn't leave his mind. That couple had dedicated their entire lives to saving for a dream, and now that dream was threatened by time. Charles thought about his own childhood, the sacrifices his parents made for him, and the pain of seeing someone so close lose everything. "They need this more than I do," he murmured to himself, picking up the phone. Charles knew he needed to act quickly. He contacted Joseph, whose number he had obtained during the return of the bag. "Mr. Joseph, this is Charles from the car dealership. Do you have a minute?" The elderly man's voice sounded surprised but receptive. "Yes, of course, son. What's up?" Charles took a deep breath. "I know you said you're still a bit short to complete the car's payment. I want to help you fulfill that dream." "What do you mean?" Joseph asked, incredulous. "I want to use part of my savings to cover the remaining amount. Consider it a gift from me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Joseph responded, his voice was choked. "Son, I don't even know what to say. I can't accept this. It's your money." "It's the right thing to do," Charles interrupted firmly. "You and your wife saved your whole lives. Isabel deserves to fulfill this dream, and you deserve to live this moment with her." Joseph moved, accepted reluctantly but with deep gratitude. The next day, Charles began planning everything. He knew he would have to be discreet to avoid problems with Edward and the other salespeople. However, his decision was made, and nothing could make him back down. He would work to ensure that Joseph and Isabel had the car of their dreams, even if it meant temporarily sacrificing his own ambitions. Charles knew that life was much more than money or status, and at that moment, he felt he was exactly where he should be, making a difference in someone's life who truly needed it. The morning was clear when Joseph parked a taxi in front of the dealership. This time, he got out of the car with firm steps, dressed in an impeccably pressed dress shirt, tailored pants, and simple yet well-maintained shoes. The hat he wore complemented the appearance of someone who, although humble, now exuded dignity. He held his leather bag with determination, as someone who knew exactly what he was about to do. Inside the store, the salespeople quickly noticed his arrival. Conversations halted for a few seconds, replaced by looks of confusion. Some didn't even recognize him immediately. But others, upon connecting that confident man to the downcast and humiliated elderly man from days ago, began exchanging whispers and giggles. "Are you serious? He's back?" murmured one of the salespeople with a mocking tone. "I think he's trying to prove something," replied another. Edward, the manager, who was at the back of the store analyzing reports, looked up upon hearing the comments and, with a sarcastic smile, walked toward the showroom. As soon as he saw Joseph, the smile gave way to an expression of disbelief. He adjusted his blazer and approached the elderly man, already preparing to handle what he believed would be another futile attempt. But before Edward could say anything, Charles appeared beside Joseph. Unlike his colleagues, Charles wore a welcoming smile, and his gaze was firm and determined. "Good morning, Mr. Joseph. Are you ready to fulfill your dream?" he asked, with a slight nod. That sentence was enough to create an uncomfortable silence in the store. Edward stood still for a moment, watching the interaction with skepticism. "Charles, what's going on here?" he asked, his tone laden with authority. Charles did not hesitate. "Mr. Joseph has come to finalize the purchase. I'm here to help him." Edward let out a short, mocking laugh. "Finalize the purchase? This gentleman can't afford it." He paused upon noticing Charles's determined look. Something about the young man made him hesitate. "All right, I want to see how this plays out." Joseph and Charles walked together to the sports sedan. The car's metallic shine seemed to reflect the ambient light even more intensely, as if it were made to be admired. Joseph stopped in front of the vehicle, his hand gently touching the hood, this time without anyone interrupting him. Charles began the purchase process. As he entered the data into the system, Edward and the other employees watched from afar, unable to hide their disbelief. Amid the chatter, cutting remarks arose. "He must have sold his entire house for this. Or he's just pretending. He probably doesn't even have real money. Charles is going to get in trouble for this, you'll see." Edward, although suspicious, did not prevent the process from continuing but remained attentive. It was as if he expected something to go wrong. In the sales office, Charles presented the final documents for Joseph to sign. He had carefully calculated everything, using the value of Joseph's bag combined with his own contribution. Each signature was accompanied by a sparkle in Joseph's eyes, as if he still couldn't believe that this moment was truly happening. At the end, Charles entered the last information into the system, clicked Complete Sale, and turned to Joseph with a wide smile. "It's official, Mr. Joseph. The car is yours." Joseph looked at the young salesperson, his eyes welling up, and shook his hand firmly. "You don't know what this means to me, to us." Charles simply nodded, feeling his heart warm. When Joseph left the office, accompanied by Charles, the reactions in the store ranged from shock to barely concealed anger. Edward, standing next to other salespeople, took a step forward, his face red. "So, you managed to sell the car?" Edward said, trying to maintain his composure. "Yes," replied Charles simply. Edward narrowed his eyes. "And who exactly is going to pay the difference, Charles? Because I know that man didn't have enough." Charles gave a small smile, but didn't go into details. "Everything was handled according to the store's policies. You can check the documents if you'd like." Edward huffed, realizing he had no arguments. He knew that any attempt to stop the sale at this point would go against the dealership's policies, and the store's image could be tarnished. Even so, the resentment was evident in each of his gestures. Meanwhile, Joseph walked to the car with the keys in hand. The salespeople watched in silence as he opened the door for the first time. He entered, sitting in the driver's seat, and spent a few seconds caressing the steering wheel. Discreet tears rolled down his face. As he exited the vehicle, he turned to Charles once more. "You were more than a salesperson today. You were a friend. Isabel won't believe it." Charles held Joseph's shoulder for a moment, with a sincere smile. "She deserves it, and so do you." Joseph left the store driving the car, now officially his, with a smile that seemed to light up the very day. Inside, Charles ignored the biased looks and venomous whispers from his colleagues. To him, it was all worth it. It wasn't about money or status, but about something much greater, transforming lives with empathy and courage. The sun was already beginning to set when Joseph parked the sports sedan in front of his modest house. The car's metallic shine reflected the last lights of the day, creating a charming contrast with the simplicity of the surrounding environment. Joseph got out of the vehicle with a mix of emotion and anxiety. His heart was pounding. That moment was the culmination of years of sacrifice and love. The front door opened slowly, and Isabel appeared in the doorway. Despite being weakened by her illness, she maintained an upright posture, her eyes filled with tenderness. Upon seeing Joseph, and more so the parked car, her face transformed into an expression of disbelief. "Joseph?" she asked, her voice trembling. He smiled, adjusting his hat. "It's ours, Isabel." For a moment she remained silent, her hands covering her mouth. Then with slow steps she walked to the car as if she feared it was just a dream about to disappear. Joseph held her hand and guided her to the passenger seat, carefully opening the door. "Get in, my love. Today you'll feel the wind you've always dreamed of." She sat down, running her hand over the dashboard and upholstery. Her tear-filled eyes reflected the interior's glow. Joseph circled around and got into the car. He turned the key, and the engine purred softly, filling the air with an almost magical energy. He looked at Isabel. "Shall we take a drive?" She nodded, unable to say a word, and Joseph smiled before shifting gears and taking the car onto the winding road through the small town. In the weeks that followed, the couple made a point of cherishing every moment together. Although Isabel didn't have as much energy as before, she seemed to come alive with each trip they took. Small dirt roads took them to places they had never been, but also reconnected them to spots that held special memories. One afternoon they stopped in a sunflower field where they had picnicked when they were young. Joseph parked the car near the shade of a tree and helped Isabel out. They sat on the grass, watching the horizon while reliving stories from the past. "Remember that day you made a cake and it collapsed on the way?" Joseph teased, laughing. "And you insisted on eating it anyway, saying it was the best cake you'd ever had," Isabel replied, laughing softly. For a few hours it was as if time had turned back. They were just Joseph and Isabel, the dreaming couple who believed the world was big and full of possibilities. Meanwhile, at the dealership, Charles was experiencing his own transformation. He couldn't get the expression of happiness on Joseph's face when he left the store out of his mind. For the first time, he felt that his profession wasn't just about numbers and targets, but about connecting with people's stories and helping them achieve their dreams. On a particularly calm day, he reflected on the impact of that act. He remembered Joseph's words, the sacrifice that man and his wife had made throughout their lives. He thought about the genuine gratitude Joseph had shown and how that simple gesture of empathy had illuminated a future that once seemed distant and unattainable for the couple. Charles began to realize that more than selling cars, he wanted to transform experiences. He felt motivated to question the dealership's culture and inspire a new approach to dealing with customers. To him, every person who walked into the store was now an opportunity to create something special. One morning, Charles received a call from Joseph. "Good morning, kid. I just wanted to thank you once again. Isabel has never been this happy." Charles felt his heart warm. "I'm very happy for you both, Mr. Joseph. That's what matters. Charles, my son, you did more than sell a car. You gave us the chance to live, and that's priceless." After hanging up, Charles sat for a few minutes, absorbing those words. He knew that challenges at work would continue, that Edward would still look at him with suspicion, and that his colleagues might never understand why he made that decision. But none of that mattered. He had found a greater purpose, something that transcended numbers and statistics, the chance to change lives, one gesture at a time. As Joseph and Isabel explored new roads and rediscovered their love for life, Charles carried with him the certainty that sometimes small sacrifices are capable of lighting the path to something much greater. The days following Joseph and Isabel's trips were filled with intense moments of love, gratitude, and silent farewells. Isabel, though growing more fragile each day, still found the strength to smile beside Joseph, especially when they went out in the car they had always dreamed of owning. However, Joseph knew that the time they had left was short. The disease was advancing relentlessly, and he could see it in his wife's eyes. One night, after returning from one last trip along a flower-lined road that Isabel loved, Joseph helped her lie down on the bed. She gently held his hand and looked into his eyes. "Joseph, thank you for everything, for never giving up on our dreams, even when it seemed impossible." Joseph, with teary eyes, pressed her hand against his chest. "There's nothing I wouldn't do for you, Isabel. You are everything to me, always have been." The next morning, Isabel passed away peacefully, with Joseph by her side. The small room in their home, illuminated by the soft glow of dawn, seemed to hold all the serenity of their love. Joseph sat beside her, holding her hand for the last time, in silence. Grief took hold of Joseph, but amidst the sadness, he found strength in the memories they had shared. The car, parked in front of the house, was now a living symbol of their love and determination, but it also carried an emotional weight that Joseph knew he couldn't bear forever. Days later, with a heavy heart, he made a decision. The car didn't belong to him alone. It belonged to a greater story, a cycle that needed to continue. He put on his best clothes and drove to the dealership where it all had begun. When Joseph entered the store, the environment seemed the same, but he no longer cared about the employees' glances. He was no longer the man who had been humiliated weeks ago. He was someone who had overcome barriers of prejudice and realized a dream. His focus was on Charles. Charles, upon seeing him enter, immediately left the customer he was talking to and went to him. "Mr. Joseph, it's good to see you. How are you?" The elderly man took a deep breath, holding the car keys in his trembling hands. "Isabel has passed away, my son," he said with a hoarse voice. Charles felt a tightness in his chest, placing his hand on Joseph's shoulder in a gesture of support. "I'm so sorry, truly. She was an incredible woman. I'm sure of that." Joseph smiled slightly, his eyes teary. "She was, and more. But now I need to do something." He extended the keys to Charles, who looked at the object with surprise and confusion. "What is this, Mr. Joseph?" "The car. I want it to be yours." Charles took a step back, shaking his head. "No, I can't accept it. This car is a part of your history with Isabel. It's the symbol of what you both achieved together." Joseph held Charles's hands firmly and stared at him. "Exactly. It's a symbol, but I don't need it anymore. Now it's you who needs it. This car isn't just about what Isabel and I lived through. It's about what you've done for us. Without you, this dream would never have happened. And now, I wanted to help you continue changing people's lives, just as it changed ours." Charles felt tears welling up. He knew that Joseph's gesture was much more than a gift. It was the continuation of something greater. After a few seconds of hesitation, he took the keys, holding them carefully. "Thank you, Mr. Joseph. I don't know what to say." Joseph smiled, relieved. "You don't need to say anything. Just keep being the good man you are." Charles parked the sports sedan in front of a small plaza in the center of the community where he grew up. The car, which once symbolized an almost impossible dream, was now much more than that. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a symbol of hope, generosity, and transformation. As he opened the door, he was greeted by a group of children running around him, excited to see him again. "Uncle Charles, did you bring the books?" asked a girl, her eyes shining with anticipation. Charles smiled, grabbing a stack of books from the back seat. "I did, and there are plenty of new stories for you all." The children surrounded him, laughing and thanking him as he distributed the books. Since receiving the car from Joseph, Charles had turned his visits to the community into a regular commitment. In addition to donating items like books and clothes, he used the car to transport people in need, an elderly man who needed medical exams, a mother who had to take her son to school in another town, or even to deliver supplies to families in difficult situations. As Charles expanded his impact on the community, Joseph found solace in his quiet afternoons on his home's porch. His friendship with Charles had become an anchor in his life. The young man visited him frequently, bringing not only stories of his travels and actions, but also companionship and laughter. "You're a special guy, Charles," Joseph said during one of these visits while they were having coffee on the porch. "I'm not anything like that, Mr. Joseph. I'm just trying to give back what you and Isabel taught me, that what we do for others is what really matters." Joseph smiled, shaking his head. "And that's exactly what makes you special." These conversations not only warmed Joseph's heart, but also helped him keep Isabel's memory alive. He shared with Charles the stories of the love he had lived alongside her, while Charles, in turn, recounted the small miracles that arose from his efforts to help others. One morning, Edward, the dealership manager, watched through his office window as Charles parked the sports sedan in the parking lot. Since Joseph had handed the car to Charles, Edward couldn't hide his discomfort. He still didn't understand why someone would choose to sacrifice their own money, time, and ambitions to help a stranger. "Charles, you're a good salesperson, but you're wasting your potential with these eccentricities," Edward said when Charles entered the showroom. Charles took a deep breath, knowing that Edward would never understand. "I'm not wasting anything, Edward. I'm just investing in things that really matter." Edward shook his head, clearly frustrated, as Charles walked to his office without giving it much attention. He knew their values would never align with Edward's, but he also knew he had found something more important than any approval. Time passed, and the impact of Charles's actions began to spread. People from the community he had helped shared their stories with others, creating a cycle of inspiration. Some of the children who received books started visiting Charles to talk about what they had read, bringing with them the dreams that the books planted in their hearts. Joseph, even in his advanced age, felt that his legacy was being perpetuated in ways he had never imagined. He knew that the car, such an important symbol for him and Isabel, now had an even greater purpose. More than fulfilling a dream, it had become an instrument of transformation. One afternoon, Charles and Joseph decided to take a trip together. Sitting in the sports sedan, they drove to a dirt road leading to a flower-filled field. They parked the car and got out, sitting on the grass to admire the horizon. The silence between them was not one of absence, but of fulfillment, as if both knew their lives had crossed for a greater reason. "You know, Charles, when I entered that store, I thought I was in the wrong place. Today I realize I couldn't have been more right," Joseph said, looking up at the sky. Charles smiled, looking at his friend with respect. "And I thought I was selling cars to change my life. Little did I know I was starting to change other people's lives." And at the end of that trip, Charles knew that Isabel and Joseph's legacy would continue to live on in every road he traveled with the car, helping to light the paths of those who needed it most. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.